Welcome to CIA Torture, American Heroes, or Sadistic Psychopaths. You decide. I'm your host, John Kelly, here for newsinsideout.com. This week, the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence released a 525-page redacted summary of their study on CIA torture practices under the Bush administration. Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal Judge Alfred Lambermont Weber is here to offer commentary and take questions from the audience. Alfred Weber, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Alfred, as a preamble to tonight's broadcast in this public affairs program, I'd like to talk about further to newsinsideout.com's reporting on the release of the Senate committee study. I published an article investigating former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney's appearance on Fox News, in which he critiqued the Senate for their report and at the same time lauded the performance of the CIA. I published the story, which is right now on the front page of newsinsideout.com. It talks about Cheney. I believe the working title of that article is Cheney's Kiss of Shame, and people can find that on newsinsideout.com. Well, I received a report earlier today from a reader on Facebook who indicated they were in a Colorado public library and that this article had in fact been blocked by the library's internet filters, citing what it described as illegal activities. I subsequently called in to what I believe is the library where this was taking place, and in hand I had the District County Library Policies and Procedures Manual that was published in March of this year, in which it indicated under Internet policy that a chart would be available to the public that would define how the Internet filters were employed and what they were filtering for. It would be public information. But when I inquired to the librarians by telephone, the librarian at the front desk was not able to provide me with such a chart, and neither was the director of the local library. They were quite agitated, in fact. They appeared to be out of compliance with their own county dictates, and furthermore, they sent me to the director of the county director who had authored these policy and procedure documents. But I was left with the distinct impression that private contractors were in fact responsible for filtering in public libraries here in our modern times, our 21st century world, and that they are performing censorship ahead of issues even reaching the point of discussion, that choices are being made for people visiting public libraries about what information they will receive, and that there apparently is no transparency or accountability. I mean, there was no public chart available that the library could present to me. There's no accountability or transparency about how these decisions are being made. Alfred, what is your comment on this scenario that I'm just describing now?
Well, I think that this is indicative of the deep malaise with the rollout of what people call the New World Order. That situation, I would guess, is a direct result of the false flag operation of September 11, 2001, which was accompanied by the Patriot Act, which then put into motion a variety of things, including a new department, the Department of Homeland Security, which essentially is the Department of Censorship, and which tied in permissible thoughts in violation of the First Amendment, and which implemented a whole series of regulations regarding libraries. So that relates directly to tonight's topic, because you have very competing interests in the U.S. As we can see, you have the Senate Intelligence Committee, which has been trying mightily to get out this report. And the report basically is contained in the trial record of the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal of 2 years ago, in 2012, where we tried Cheney, Bush, and Rumsfeld and their lawyers for torture and found them to be war criminals, essentially on the same evidence that is in the torture report. However, as part of the false flag of not September 11th, 2001, the forces that are attempting to take down the constitutional order in the United States, including Bush and Cheney, who were president and vice president at that time, have implemented regulations implemented by Homeland Security affecting libraries and other sources of public information, such that it becomes the Department of Homeland Security's job or purview to censor the information coming into libraries. And they simply would say that your report on Cheney, they would not want in the libraries because this would, since it revealed the systematic way that Cheney, who was sort of the torture czar of the Bush administration, since it was probative evidence of the fact that torture was so pervasive inside the Bush and inside the Bush administration, and so pervasively practiced by the U.S. government, that the present Department of Homeland Security may have wanted to censor that because perhaps there still is a form of torture going on, number one. Number two, they want to prevent any liability of the U.S. government for any financial and other liability of the U.S. government and of these actors, presidents, vice presidents, and government officials and contractors. And the Department of Homeland Security now has subcontracted all of its functions so that we have America, the increasingly imprisoned state, being carried out by contractors under spin-offs of the Patriot Act brought into being by a false flag operation carried out by the very president and vice president that have been implementing and signing off on all the invoices. So this is the ultimate of the corporate fascistic state.
I find it stunning, and I know as a young reader back in the 1970s, if I had had such oversight of my selection of materials, I wonder what my worldview would have come out looking like if it had been absent of many, perhaps, the controversial issues and subjects that I was exposed to through extensive reading in the public libraries at that time. So certainly, this is just one dimension of modern life and society. We have the facade of freedom, but in fact, we have preemptive censorship operating behind the scenes.
Exactly.
Let's move on more to tonight's focus on tonight's topic, which is the release of the Senate Committee study, the redacted 525 pages that outlines in grim detail what may be a surprise to some members of the public who have not been following this issue over the last dozen years or so. Let's go back into interpretations of the law in a traditional American society going back to the 19th century. There's a notion that states an attempt to torture a person accused of crime in order to extort a confession is an indictable offense. And this is from a law dictionary that's dated back to 1856. Where are we today with regards to this position on torture? Is torture a crime?
Well, torture is a crime, and it's a crime under the Geneva Conventions, which the U.S. has signed since 1949, and which all of practically all of the major powers have signed. And Convention 1 says this convention protects wounded and infirm soldiers and medical personnel against attack, execution without judgment, torture, and assaults upon personal dignity. It grants them the right to proper medical treatment and care. And the same thing applies to Convention 3 if they're prisoners of war. And Convention 4 of the Geneva Convention, under this convention, civilians are afforded the protections from inhumane treatment and attack afforded in the first convention, sick and wounded soldiers. Furthermore, additional regulations regarding the treatment of civilians prohibit attacks on civilian hospitals, medical transports, and etc. And there are protocols which define humane treatment. There are protocols which define protected persons, and it has been principally two nations, the nation of Israel and the Bush administration of the United States, that have systematically violated the Geneva Conventions and other applicable laws.
Very interesting. When we look at the Bush administration, back in 2001, President Bush proposed that the UN never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September 11th, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty. However, this week, a statement from one of the members of the UN reads that the individuals responsible for the criminal conspiracy revealed in this week's report from the Senate must be brought to justice and must face criminal penalties commensurate with the gravity of their crimes. Is the UN propagating the type of conspiracy theory that President Bush warned about, or does their claim pose a clear and present danger to American values like freedom and democracy?
Well, I would say that finally the forces of justice are beginning to break through. We're now in today's the 12th of December, 12/12, 2014. So we're approximately 13 years from the false flag operation of 2001, where the statement of President Bush is commonly known as a PSYOP, a psychological operation, whereby the person conducting the operation, in order to baffle or befuddle the public, or the public being the enemy in this case, one utters an obvious reversal. That is, Bush, knowing that he was a conspirator, a co-conspirator, and a co-participant in the 9/11 false flag, he goes to the United Nations and says, we must never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning these attacks of September 11th, shifting blame away from the terrorists. So he's acting there in what we call the keystone position in the pyramid of a false flag. That is, he is the highest ranking public authority who participated in the conspiracy. Currently, Barack Obama does that many times, as in the Boston Marathon false flag. In this case, since President Bush was part of the 2001 false flag operation of September 11th, 2001, his job was to go to the UN and perform what's called the capstone of the pyramid of the pyramid of false flag conspiracy, and do a reversal, a propaganda reversal, in which he says, we must never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September 11th. When it was Bush that was the commander-in-chief of the September 11th, or he was a co-conspirator in, because it was intended to benefit him and his administration to start the war on terror, so that he and his father in the in the partnership from the budgets on the War on Terror, and his vice president, who controlled and through friendship stock exchanges controlled many of the contractors in the War on Terror. And so Bush there is, by his own words, indicting himself, because these are words of art in what we call information war. So he might as well go on to the UN and say, I was guilty in 9/11, and I'm coming here to issue a PSYOPs reversal today. And so the fact that I know that the wheels of justice work extremely slowly, but they work exceedingly fine. And so here we are 13 years later, and the more progressive forces inside the U.S. Senate have finally brought forth a report, and which sets out certain facts, and that report then engenders a statement from the UN stating that that man who came here a number of years ago and said that he participated in September 11th as a false flag should now be prosecuted for the the criminal conspiracy and torture. And in fact, as we shall see later in the program, I was a sitting judge in the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal trial that ended in May of 2012, where we found essentially George W. Bush, Richard B. Cheney, Donald H. Rumsfeld, Alberto Gonzales, Yu, and their lawyers, Alberto Gonzales, Yu, Bybee, Addington, and Haynes, to be guilty of conspiracy to evade the Geneva Convention. So they all got together in a room, and over time, and they entered into a plan to enter into a regime of torture to evade the Geneva Conventions against torture and the UN Convention against torture. So they tried a slick Willie move, but it didn't work, and they've been busted. They've been adjudged by the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunals to be war criminals guilty of torture. Now they have been adjudged to some extent by the U.S. Senate, a separate branch of government. Now the United Nations is an international body, has taken that report and read and said the individual responsible for the criminal conspiracy must be brought to justice and must face criminal penalties. So the only question is how one is going to acquire jurisdiction over Bush and Cheney. I think that will occur with a regime change in the United States, which I understand is forthcoming.
You're watching CIA Torture, American Heroes, or Sadistic Psychopaths. You decide. I'm your host, John Kelly, for NewsInsideOut.com. My guest tonight is Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal Judge Alfred Lambremont Weber, and we are discussing factors in the release of this week's Senate Committee, Select Committee on Intelligence study of tortures by the CIA under the Bush administration. There's a 525-page redacted summary available at NewsInsideOut.com. Just dial into our article by the same title as tonight's program, and you will see the download link in PDF. You can review for yourself what has been released to the public, what the UN is responding to, what the world may be responding to right now in terms of how revelatory any of this information is for folks who've been following Kuala Lumpur, who've been following the torture issue for a long time. This may not be anything new, but the fact that the Senate has made a move, I think, is significant. As Alfred said, there are progressives who are attempting to steer history in a more positive direction, and we can certainly endorse that. With regards to torture prosecutions, Alfred, the Justice Department has said that nobody would be prosecuted who had acted in good faith and within the scope of the legal guidance given by the Office of Legal Counsel regarding the interrogation of detainees. when we consider good faith or sincere motive absent of malice as a legal defense, is there such a thing as non-malicious torture?
The answer is no, because there's an absolute ban on torture in the Geneva Conventions and the UN Convention on Torture. And this is why the Obama administration is attempting to continue the United States regime on torture and attempting to cover up for the Bush conspiracy to evade the Geneva Conventions absolute ban on torture. What we found as a tribunal at the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal is that Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, and their lawyers, including the Attorney General of the United States, Alberto Gonzales, that issued all of the legal guidance of the Office of Legal Counsel. So this question is actually a direct continuation of the cover-up, because they know that Alberto Gonzales has been adjudged a war criminal. And what occurred is that the Justice Department counsel, the State Department counsel, the Defense Department counsel, all issued fraudulent legal opinions that were based on an attempt to evade the Geneva Conventions, which are an absolute ban against torture. So they could bring in their, quote, enhanced interrogation techniques, which violated the Geneva Conventions. And so the question that you just asked is a clear indication that the Obama administration should be prosecuted as well for a conspiracy to continue the conspiracy to violate the Geneva Conventions of its predecessor, the Bush administration.
There are critics online now who seem to be saying that the very continuity of the United States as a credible nation before the world is dependent upon the Obama administration pursuing these types of prosecutions, and yet there seems to be intense hesitancy on their part to do anything. The Department of Justice apparently is not receiving any guidance from the Obama White House to prosecute these crimes.
Well, we could go deeply into the fact that Barack Obama, as a third-generation CIA operative, has continued to engage in crimes against humanity and genocide and gross violation of the Geneva Conventions and its protection of civilians, and through its drone program. And in its drone program, the only thing that Barack Obama has done is to say, well, I'm following CIA secret guidelines, in which he's judge, jury, and an executioner, and in which he is, through a study, it's been shown that the civilian casualties violate all of the categories set out in the Geneva Conventions and can be predicted. And so what we have here is that the Obama administration and Barack Obama, Barry Soetoro Soebarka, is continuing with impunity a conspiracy to violate the Geneva Conventions that his predecessor, George W. Bush, engaged in. And thereby, he is opening himself up to prosecution. So I would include him in the UN statement as well, and his administration.
The UN statement from this week goes further in stating how international law prohibits the granting of immunities to public officials who have engaged in acts of torture. This applies not only to the actual perpetrators, it says, but also to those senior officials within the U.S. government who have devised, planned, and authorized these crimes. However, from the Justice Department position, they say that they've considered all potentially applicable substantive criminal statutes as well as the statutes of limitations and jurisdictional provisions that govern prosecutions under those statutes. But Alfred, my question to you is there such a thing as a statute of limitations on torture?
No, because there's no statute of limitations on the on violations of the Geneva Conventions, and there's no statute of limitations on violations of the UN Convention Against Torture. These are international standards, and so the Obama administration is using again the same fraudulent, conspiratorial use of by the Attorney General, by the State Department, by the Defense Department, by the counsel to the White House, that found them as war criminals in 2012, and that finds them now in Obama. What is occurring is that the breakdown, and this is my analysis as a war crimes correspondent for newsinsideout.com, for Press TV, and other international networks, is that there has been such a fundamental breakdown of the constitutional order in the United States since the CIA essentially took over the presidency with the assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. And then ever since the accession to power of George H.W. Bush and all of those other presidents who were pre-identified through quantum access time travel and groomed often 20 years in advance as functional CIA agents, that the U.S. government and the Constitution essentially have ceased to exist. And it is for that reason, I believe, that substantial forces within the United States and outside of the United States are now seeking that the original Constitution of the United States be restored, and that the false Constitution that was adopted secretly through agency of the Vatican Crown and the British Crown in 1871 be eliminated, and that the current regime, which is an unlawful regime, which is a rogue regime in violation of international law, be removed, tried, and imprisoned.
Those are very powerful statements and really shocking weight to what you're saying, considering how these acts have gone on for so long, and the power of these revelations indicating, as you've just mentioned, that the entire social political infrastructure that we understood to be the United States is absent, has disappeared, and has been replaced with some sort of monstrosity. In which censorship at libraries and torture of individuals at death camps is apparently in some kind of new American value. You're watching CIA Torture, American Heroes, or Sadistic Psychopaths. You decide. And in a little while, we're going to be open to take your questions. We're running early in the production cycle here, and so I hope to be able to address questions from viewers. If you're watching now and you have questions, we have the Q&A application open on tonight's Hangout for our live broadcast. We are being joined by a very special guest. Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal Judge Alfred Lambremont-Weber is here to address the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence's summary of the study on CIA torture under the Bush administration, and we are seeing so far that the Justice Department refuses to prosecute people who have been convicted in absentia of war crimes, including torture, and that there is a crisis in contemporary society. There's a crisis today happening behind the scenes, in which the future of the United States and the entire society in North America apparently is being decided by those who would seek a restoration of what are understood as traditional values, morals, and ethics, which have been substituted by this junk food of post-Patriot Act culture, Orwellian 1984 type society that critics say has even gone past what Orwell may have ever imagined or dreamed of. We are in uncharted territory, folks, in terms of where our society is heading, and questions like torture, public accountability, transparency, and ethics are at the forefront. This is the clarion call of our times, in fact, I believe, for people to become active and raise their voices and empower themselves around this definitive question. If we let this slide, what kind of society will we create for the future generations? Alfred, you've said a lot about how the participants in the Bush administration and their different legal representatives at the State Department, et cetera, intentionally attempted to evade the law. The CIA's Office of General Counsel pronounced their attempt to implement what they described as a novel application of the necessity defense to avoid prosecution of U.S. officials who tortured to obtain information that saved many lives. And so here in 2001, the CIA was defining the actions as torture in their own writings. They knew that they were advocating for torture, and they knew that with the Geneva Conventions already in place, they knew that the legal status of those actions. But they sought to apply the necessity defense. And my simple reading of necessity defense, as it's understood in U.S. law, in applications like prison escapes, where people are compelled due to personal danger to participate in illegal activities like joint escape attempts from prison, there's some consensus in the states that an escapee must make an attempt to surrender or report to authorities as a condition for asserting the necessity defense. However, in the CIA's destruction of evidence, such as the missing torture tapes that are cited in the Senate study, as well as misleading statements under oath, including General Hayden's appearance in 2007, where there's been a strict policy of denial of any kind of criminal activity. It appears that the CIA is disqualified as candidate for shielding by this necessity defense. And really, Alfred, can you tell us point blank, are premeditated attempts to commit crimes and then avoid prosecution by exploiting legal loopholes, are these typically viewed favorably by the courts?
Well, the thing is that what we're dealing with here are not garden variety crimes. These are what are called war crimes, and they're dealt with in by very specific, long-held standards that are signed by most of the countries on the planet. We're talking about the Geneva Conventions, which are sacrosanct in war, and the UN Convention Against Torture. Everybody knows what the Geneva Conventions are. Every soldier is told that. And so this was an attempt by a team. Further investigation will have to unearth the role of Israel in this, the role of Dick Cheney in bringing in. Cheney was famous. He said, well, sometimes you just got to walk on the dark side. Why these people fought at the level of Bush, because the order came down from the Oval Office, which the Oval Office at that time was a rubber stamp for what Dick Cheney came in with. And so here, we aren't dealing with typical courts. Let me read you some of the evidence that we found, and this is from the actual charges and findings in the 2012 Kuala Lumpur case against Cheney, against Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Gonzalez, and the other State Department defense lawyers. Okay, these are the acts, and You know, I was watching the U.S. Senator from California reading them on television the other night, and she could have been reading from our documents. I'll just read them here. A, hooding for incredibly long hours. B, short shackling where the hands and legs of a detainee are tied together for prolonged periods of time, up to 78 hours. C, shackling of the feet, body, and hands for prolonged periods. D, chaining in physically impossible postures, including to the floor of a cell, for prolonged periods. E, shackling and chaining for long periods, such as to cause severe and prolonged physical pain. F, sleep deprivation. G, being subjected to blasting loud noises continuously for prolonged periods. H, continuous beating causing severe pain. I, confinement in solitary and often while hooded for prolonged periods. J, subjecting to extreme and physically unbearable conditions, extreme cold or hot, humid, devoid of sunlight. K, overcrowding prisoners in distantly small cells. L, disallowing normal bodily functions in decent conditions, not allowing to go to the toilet, have a bath, defecation in full view of others, abruptly ending prisoners when carrying out such conditions. M, withholding foods and or drinks. N, when food was provided, providing atrocious and terrible food. O, humiliation, including by women officers. We all remember, those pictures from Abu Ghraib. P, using dogs to threaten and intimidate. Q, using electrocution, including sensitive areas such as genitalia, with cattle prods. R, threatening to harm family members, as simulating torture of family members. T, threatening to shoot with gun pointed to the head. U, securing confession through coercion and inducements. V, denying medical treatment. That's a direct violation of the Geneva Conventions. I mean, this is like by the letter. And these are the quote, are enhanced interrogation techniques. You might as well say, they just substituted violation of the Geneva Conventions and they put another word in there, enhanced interrogation techniques. This is a conspiracy to violate the Geneva Conventions. And since they did the false flag of 9/11, and since they went to the UN and bragged about it through Bush and through Skull and Bones reverse speech, they became overly proud and thought that they could do it to the world. And dispensing hallucinogenic drugs, suggesting suicide. All of that are explicit violation of the Geneva Conventions, which was signed in 1949 by all nations, significantly all nations. So, this is a fraud. And you have the Obama administration who's still trying to perpetuate this fraud on the world. It's a joint Israeli-U.S. government fraud. Now, the U.S. government is not the U.S. government. It's the government of the U.S. corporation, which was introduced by the 1871 Constitution, which is controlled by the Vatican Crown and the British Crown, of which the U.S. president are executive officers. So that's why you have apparatchiks like Bush, Cheney, and Obama acting with impunity, and they're all walking around using Israeli methods, having U.S. police trained in Israel, turning the United States into Gaza, and torturing the rest of the world with impunity because they think that they've imported Third Reich methods, which they have. The Department of Homeland Security is based on the Third Reich, which they brought over through Operation Paperclip, officers and documents. So they figure that with that technology, they're going to win. However, they didn't count on the positive timeline coming in on December 21st, 2012. And that's their comeuppance, in my opinion.
With regards to this Planet Israel perspective that is apparently being imposed without any kind of due consideration internationally now, what can you say further as to Israel's involvement in perpetrating these war crimes and instigating, pushing the Bush administration and the Obama administration in these directions?
Well, I can say a great deal because I happen to be a judge of the 9/11 War Crimes Tribunal. And people can go to www.911warcrimestribunal.org. Just go there and start looking there. And that is a citizens' tribunal of conscience to adjudge the war crimes, i.e., the violation of the Geneva Conventions, of the UN Convention Against Torture, of the other of the Rome Statute, of the International Criminal Court, crimes against humanity, genocide, which were involved in the 9/11 false flag operation. And since there was a conspiracy in the 9/11 attacks, the purpose of the 9/11 attacks were to set up a pretext for the war on terror, which included an attack upon Afghanistan, which the Tokyo International Tribunal for War Crimes in Afghanistan found to be crimes against humanity, genocide, and ecocide through the use of depleted uranium weapons there that have created birth defects, cancers, all sorts of toxic and wastelands of radiation there. And so all of those crimes are now ascribed to the co-conspirators of 9/11 because that was part of their plan, to use the invasion of Afghanistan and subsequently of Iraq on the pretext of 9/11, of which they were co-conspirators as well, and the use of depleted uranium weapons, which are genocidal weapons in both theaters. So here we have a clear chain of evidence going from evidence to commit war crimes. And now the role of Israel is very clear, and that is that there's clear-cut evidence that Israel was one of the prime operational elements of 9/11, and that a special plane, in fact, the plane of the Prime Minister of Israel, carried highly trained special forces and operatives into New York a couple of days before 9/11. They would carry out the mini nukes, the HARPs, other elements of the operation, and the same personnel were evacuated from 9/11 immediately after the 9/11 operation. So Benjamin Netanyahu, the current Prime Minister of Israel, was one of the principals behind the 9/11 attack. This is classified as an act of war, an act of aggressive war, and a violation of the UN Charter by Israel. And it continues with impunity because of the co-conspirator and acts of treason by the then President of the United States, George W. Bush, Condoleezza Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, Vice President Richard B. Cheney, and numerous Israeli United States dual citizens who participated in this armed attack by Israel upon the United States and covered it up. However, under Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, participation in an attack upon in an armed attack upon the United States constitutes treason, punishable by the death penalty. Therefore, the evidence shows that the aforementioned have committed treason, subject to capital punishment. And Israel has attacked the United States with aggressive war on September 11, 2001. The officer in charge was one Benjamin Netanyahu, and war crimes proceedings should immediately be commenced. Again, all these parties in the International Criminal Court. That's why we at the 9/11 War Crimes Tribunal, a citizens' tribunal of conscience, are undertaking proceedings pending the immediate arrest of these parties by competent authorities.
Very good. You know, a lot of this would make more sense if everything that's happened here in the United States and Canada in the last 15 years or so was really designed to dismantle the infrastructure of the society and to create public mistrust of our institutions and our ruling officials. It would all make a lot more sense. In this week's commentary, veteran U.S. interrogator Mark Fallon came forward this week saying, "Many of us charged with the mission of getting information out of terrorists didn't resort to using torture. Like many Americans, we didn't want our government to use torture, and we hope it never does again." So it seems there are still honorable people, there were and still are honorable people working in various organizations, law enforcement, military, even intelligence operations. But in a time like today, when the public is engaged in mass protests over police killings of some seemingly harmless individuals, we can only ask, what has the government's conduct done to further develop and protect the credibility of its people and its institutions? You know, again, as I say, if this was all intended to undermine public trust and dismantle an entire nation, that would make a lot more sense. What is your position?
My position is that ever since the functional coup d'etat took place by an organized international war crimes racketeering organization which assassinated the U.S. President John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963, installed a co-conspirator, Lyndon Baines Johnson, as president. This has been the United States has been occupied by a hostile force that whose goal was, in essence, to turn the United States into Gaza, into a prison camp. What amazes me as an American is that Americans have remained so docile. If their national motto, or if our national motto is, I can't even remember it now, the land of the free and the home of the brave, I think it should be the land of the imprisoned and the home of the docile, because the evidence is out there in everybody's face and nobody has done nothing. The entire Congress has been bought off. In 2006, right after the midterm elections, in which the neocons lost control of the Senate, we went with the 9/11 Treason Independent Prosecutor Act to appoint an independent prosecutor to prosecute the then President, Vice President, Secretary of Defense for 9/11, for treason under Article 3. We met with the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, that is the incoming chairman, and the senior staff. He was up in Detroit for Thanksgiving. We gave them all the papers. The senior staff person said, "Yep, this is very serious." Haven't heard from them since. We've got a nation of 300 million people. They're supposed to be a nation with some, consciousness of liberty, and they just seem to be hogtied and very easily manipulated by a Bush family that comes in, takes their liberty, and says, let's go off and genocide a country with atomic weapons, with nuclear weapons, with DU weapons that will give them birth defects for generations. And everybody has, goes, yeah, let's do it. So I think that we've got a serious situation here, because and I'm very gratified that 13 years after the fact, finally, we have a little bit of a glimmer, or finally a report that we, as Citizens Tribunal, 2 years ago took that step. What about 9/11? What about the Kennedy assassination? I, together with Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez, the chairman of the House Banking Committee, he invited me to Washington in 1976, said, let's set up an investigation of the John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy assassinations, Malcolm X. We met with the Black Caucus. We set up that investigation instantly. It was infiltrated by the CIA. We still got something of a report out, but the great American public, they seem to have lost their identity and core as a nation and bought into superficial advertising and mind control. And until they take responsibility for this and, get beyond the mind control of the Bushes and the other war crimes presidents, including Clinton and Obama, they're lost. That's my opinion as a judge, and that's my opinion as a person involved in this struggle within the United States since the Kennedy assassination, who's been called on by champions like Henry B. Gonzalez, who's been a part of the 9/11 movement. We held a 9/11 conference in the middle of New York in 2007 in the same hall that Abraham Lincoln sought the second, made a very, very impressive speech. The hall was empty. The hall was empty. This is the middle of Manhattan on 9/11, and it was surrounded by emergency medical vehicles that were giving off EMF signals so as to keep crowds away. Americans have just been brainwashed up the wazoo, and they don't even know that they're imprisoned. And it seems like they're so manipulated by the latest flavor of the month that they've lost their souls. So I like to give them a swift kick in the pants and hope that they wake up. I know that's harsh, but sometimes harsh medicine is the greatest thing.
You're watching CIA Torture, American Heroes, or Sadistic Psychopaths, You Decide. I'm your host, John Kelly, for NewsInsideOut.com. Our special guest, Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal Judge Alfred Lam Weber, with valuable commentary and historic insight, first-person insight from his journey through American history, involved in investigating the assassination of JFK, the 9/11 war crimes, and today discussing the release this week of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, a CIA torture study. We've only got a few minutes left in today's show. I have invited the audience to submit questions. We don't have a lot of questions coming in right now. It may be some of our apps are not working properly, but if you have questions from tonight's broadcast and you'd like to reach us for further commentary, we can invite you to write to news@newsinsideout.com, and we'll be happy to bring together your questions and further comments in an article about tonight's broadcast. Alfred, the public is certainly stirred in the blogosphere. People are writing about this week's disclosures. One blogger, Caroli from crooksandliars.com, has written, "We all have to wear the taint Richard Bruce Cheney brought down on us with his full-throated endorsement of inhuman and evil methods of causing pain, humiliation, and harm to other human beings. It's wrong that there's no consequences for those who perpetrated it, and it's wrong that Cheney isn't languishing in a privatized prison somewhere. Cheney to Fox News said flippantly that obviously this person is not a fan, but as you had mentioned, our values seem to be so skewed. Now this is all about a popularity contest, apparently, from the Cheney perspective. That's what he said in front of the nation on broadcast television, that it's all about being whether or not we're fans of these personalities, when really this is about values. This is a question of values and reinvigorating the values that brought greatness to a people, and now what you describe as a public who appears directionless, and perhaps leadership is in absentia as well. What will it take to summon the spirit of greatness that put America on the map? What will it take to reinvigorate that in today's population, and what will be the legacy that will be left for future generations? What will grandchildren say about us, the people of today, who lived under these times and who may not have stepped up and empowered themselves to become active and vocal in the face of apparent tyranny?
Well, obviously it goes deeper than personality, because that's the level at which the media manipulation of the corporate fascistic kleptocracy that rules in the U.S. now. It actually goes hand in hand with values, but also with law. There's a fundamental breakdown in law in the United States. There's an old Latin proverb, quis custodes ipsos custodes. Who will guard the guards themselves? And so you've had a theft of the U.S. Constitution in 1871, so that we're living under a Vatican UK Crown Constitution. You have the U.S. judiciary, in a report by Dr. Richard Cordero, is wholesale rogue. The U.S. judiciary is wholesale rogue. You can go to Exopolitics TV and watch the interview there. And this is statistically wholesale rogue. They dismiss 99% of the complaints against them. And so, and all of the institutions have been infiltrated by Satanists, by people who engage in infant sacrifice, by gang stalkers who are run by implants in their brains and other parts of their bodies, and they're run by essentially police antennas or satellites or heart. So that's the hellish vision of the New World Order, and all that has to be taken out to the trash. I used to be part of the Environmental Protection Administration in the city of New York. I had line authority over 30,000 New York City garbage men. It was great. We got to enroll the garbage men, taking out the trash, and that's what we need, and restoring the U.S. Constitution.
That's excellent. It's been a great pleasure to speak with you this evening. I've been following, as many readers have been following with great interest, your articles on newsinsideout.com.
Thank you.
Readers who want to receive newsinsideout.com in their mailboxes can subscribe on the website for weekly updates. We hope to have continuous live streaming events like tonight's show, covering programs in the public interest, as well as there's constantly new content coming up. Alfred, your workload in terms of new guests, new people appearing and who want to talk to you about the issues of today is stunning, and the diversity of the issues that you're addressing is captivating. So
thank you.
I personally, and I'm sure you share my heartfelt thanks to the public who are supporting us at newsinsideout.com in our launch this week, and we hope to continue providing excellent programming like this tonight and bringing you the news.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we're going to wrap up for tonight. Again, thank you for watching. I'm John Kelly for newsinsideout.com. Write to us at newsinsideout.com with your questions and comments about tonight's show, and look for a transcript on our website this weekend. Enjoy the evening, enjoy the weekend, and be safe. God bless.